Welcome. Welcome to the Center for Latin American Studies. My name is Leila Grinberg. I am the director of the center and also a professor in history. And this is the second session of the Slavery and Memorialization in the Atlantic Road series that we are co-organizing with the Center for African Studies and also the History Department. And the co-organizers of the series are myself, Dr. Pernille, good practicing. I hope I say close to right. Dr. Alaina Roberts will be here at some point. And we have here, we have the flyer for the two other sessions that I would say at the end. So, thank you. So we have, that's the second one. After there was the first one in Africa, then we'll have slavery and memorialization on Native American East Coast on February 26th. And after apologies, the Trouble Road towards recognition of slavery in the Dutch Empire on April 9th. And if you have not signed up yet to receive our newsletter, please do so, because you will receive our newsletter with all the information about our events. I'm very, very happy to introduce this roundtable with my colleagues and my friends from Brazil. They will be talking about, in general, about slavery and memorialization in Brazil, but more closely about a project that the four of us have been working on together. So what we'll do, I'm sorry, I apologize for the absence of one of our panelists, Dr. Pernille Ribeiro, she was the only one coming from the US, coming from Philadelphia, and she had problems with her flight. She couldn't arrive, while the three of them coming from Rio and São Paulo. So what we'll do is that instead of introduce the team, I will show a video on our project. I will introduce them right away. But first, I want to thank our colleague, Dr. Jennifer Justin from the History of Art and Architecture Department, who is now already collaborating with us on this and will comment and open up the debate on this topic. So thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, everyone, to be here. I will introduce the three of them and then we'll start. So Dr. Marcia Chuva is a associate professor of history at the Universidade Federal do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, Unirio. She joined Unirio after working for several years at the National Agency for Heritage in Brazil. So Marcia, Dr. Aline Montenegro is also a historian. She works at the Ipiranga Museum in São Paulo, and she joined the museum after working several years at the National Historic Museum in Rio. And Dr. Leila Bianchi, she also is an associate professor at the History Department of Universidade Federal do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, which is my former university. So it's really, really wonderful to have all of you here. And I would just say quickly at the Zoom, you can see here, boa tarde, pessoal, vocês que estão vendo a gente no Zoom do Brasil. É um prazer ver vocês aqui. A gente vai fazer as apresentações em inglês, mas eu acredito que vai ser fácil para todo mundo entender. Bem-vindos. So we'll start with the video and then we'll pass to you. Thanks everyone for coming. There's no need for you to stand. Students are students no matter when. Sit here, and there are 3 chairs, there are plenty of space.
A exposição Brasil Decolonial, Outras Histórias, montada no Museu Histórico Nacional, é parte desse projeto, constituindo inclusive uma equipe de curadores interinstitucional que tem pesquisadores da Unirio e do Museu Histórico Nacional. Nós chamamos de exposição e intervenção justamente porque, ao invés de transformar e fazer uma exposição que desmonte a exposição permanente, a nossa intenção é intervir sobre a exposição permanente, colocando ao lado das formas de interpretação que o museu expõe, outras possíveis leituras dos mesmos objetos. Então, o desafio é justamente propor novas leituras, mas mais do que isso, a disponibilidade do Museu Histórico Nacional de se expor no confronto dessas narrativas que nós estamos intervindo no circuito principal do museu. Decolonizar como confrontar narrativas é um dos grandes desafios da exposição. E, em algumas situações, isso ficou bastante evidente. No painel Riqueza e Escravidão, a exposição Brasil Decolonial intervém diretamente no texto que está sendo exposto, riscando, rabiscando, tirando palavras e incluindo outras, como um texto sendo corrigido. E a mudança de poucas palavras torna o conteúdo daquele texto completamente diferente e permite a percepção de uma sociedade mais complexa, violenta e um passado difícil que ainda se faz presente na atualidade. Decolonizar é, antes de tudo, uma atitude. Com isso em mente, produzimos 17 intervenções no circuito principal do museu que estão conectadas com a imagem da Maria Cambinda, nossa peça inspiradora que foi estilizada na logomarca da exposição. Decolonizar é ressignificar objetos, como a máscara de ferro, hoje símbolo da resistência aos horrores da escravidão. Reconhecer sujeitos onde só se enxergavam objetos é também decolonizar. O que buscamos fazer ao destacar o protagonismo de artistas negros como Leandro Joaquim e suas telas ovais, ou Erotides Lopes e suas miniaturas.
Uma das nossas ideias é justamente chamar atenção para atores que são historicamente silenciados em grandes exposições e narrativas como essa, e que acabam passando desapercebidos ao visitante do museu. Então, por exemplo, quando a gente chega aqui no museu, uma das placas que a gente vê é a placa da Fábrica de Ferro de Ipanema, que é uma das principais fábricas do Brasil no século XIX e que é justamente usada como uma das imagens do progresso que se teria tentado alcançar no século XIX. Mas quem é que trabalha nessas fábricas? São africanos, em muitos casos mantidos em situação de escravidão, mesmo quando não são diretamente escravizados, e que são de fato a força motora da construção desse país. Então a gente quer mostrar justamente como que essa construção desse país, ela se faz através da escravidão, das estruturas escravistas, mas também mostrar como que esses indivíduos, eles são fundamentais para a gente pensar uma nova maneira de se olhar para o passado brasileiro e, portanto, também para se pensar uma outra forma de intervenção no presente. Usada largamente no Brasil nos séculos XVIII e XIX, ainda em 1950, a cadeirinha de arruar foi descrita no dicionário Moraes como a liteira que servia para transportar pessoas importantes pelas ruas das cidades. Ao dar destaque às pessoas escravizadas, em sua maioria africanas, que trabalhavam como carregadores, e não aqueles que eram carregados, nosso objetivo é chamar a atenção para a importância de questionar o glamour com que objetos como este ainda são vistos hoje em dia. A cadeirinha de arruar não é um meio de transporte do passado. Ela é uma reafirmação dos valores e das hierarquias em vigor na sociedade escravista brasileira.
Partindo dessa perspectiva, nós convidamos 2 artistas para intervirem com seus trabalhos na exposição Brasil Decolonial Outras Histórias. A Rosana Paulino e o Emiliano Dantas. A Rosana Paulino, que é um dos principais nomes da arte contemporânea no Brasil, traz uma videoinstalação intitulada Das Avós, na qual ela aborda o tema da ancestralidade da mulher negra. Já o artista Emiliano Dantas, nós convidamos para intervir no vídeo Portugueses no Mundo, o vídeo que faz parte da exposição permanente do museu. Na intervenção, as imagens que são incorporadas no vídeo e as linhas tecidas, as linhas vermelhas que são tecidas, elas falam dessa ferida colonial que ainda está aberta e da relação direta entre escravidão e racismo no Brasil. Ao contrário do vídeo exposto no museu desde 2009, a intervenção do Echoes, ela vem para causar esse desconforto, para reforçar que essa história contada, essa história gloriosa contada sobre a colonização portuguesa, ela é inseparável da história da violência contra as populações negras e indígenas e das questões raciais que perduram até os dias de hoje no Brasil.
Estou aqui para falar da Sala Riqueza e Escravidão, que tem objetos de tortura como troncos, algemas e gargalheiras, que eram utilizados na escravização de negros e negras no Brasil. Essa prática naturalizava a escravidão e a objetificação do corpo humano, da vida humana. A gente pode imaginar que isso tudo ficou no passado, mas se a gente for observar a forma como a gente vive na cidade, como se dão as nossas condições de trabalho e as relações humanas hoje em dia, muitas coisas permanecem. O que nos machuca? O que nos prende? E o que pode nos libertar?
Eu sou a lágrima, eu sou o pano, se derramada seco a dor. Sou carnaval, sou feminina, sou masculina. A minha sina é transcender o habitual. Eu sou a lágrima, eu sou o pano, se derramada seco a dor. Sou carnaval, sou feminina, sou masculina, a minha sina é transcender o habitual. Sou voz, bandeira, poeira vera, feita do barro, vou do chão ao vendaval. Alguém que berra, porque não espera viver a regra que define o que é normal. Tempo é qualquer lugar, sonho é pagar pra ver. Sorrio que enfrenta o mar.
Um dos objetivos da nossa exposição foi fomentar a reflexão sobre a construção de alguns mitos nos espaços públicos e museológicos. Nesse sentido, nós propusemos algumas legendas em obras como a escultura de Dom Pedro II, né, o imperador tem sua figura bastante atrelada ao abolicionismo, e trouxemos para essa legenda a informação da existência dos escravos da nação, homens e mulheres escravizados que trabalhavam nas residências oficiais da família real. Ao mesmo tempo, em um busto do Duque de Caxias, nós pudemos acrescentar algumas informações obtidas do seu inventário. O inventário é de 1880 e fazia parte do acervo do museu. Nesse inventário foi possível recuperar o nome de 12 homens e mulheres escravizados que trabalhavam na sua residência na Rua Conde de Bonfim, o nome e a profissão deles estarão listados. Além disso, também buscamos ressaltar alguns protagonismos que estavam invisibilizados, né, no museu, e não só no museu, mas em demais instituições museológicas. São novas narrativas que são fundamentais, cruciais para a construção de referências identitárias e também para o exercício de uma cidadania mais plena.
Vou falar um pouco sobre a Maria Cambinda. A Maria Cambinda é uma boneca, que também pode ser uma máscara, que foi doada ao Museu Histórico Nacional em 1928. Ela veio da Irmandade de Nossa Senhora do Rosário dos Pretos de Ouro Preto. Só que, ao longo de muito tempo, ela deixou de ser exposta e muitas informações foram sumindo ao longo desse tempo. E pesquisas recentes a identificaram novamente e ela foi exposta no circuito permanente do Museu Histórico Nacional como uma alegoria do continente africano no contexto das expansões marítimas portuguesas. Nós do Projeto Ecos fizemos uma outra leitura, propusemos outra leitura com uma intervenção, dando destaque à Maria Cambinda, ela inclusive é o símbolo da nossa exposição, que é tirá-la desse contexto da história da colonização e integrá-la ao contexto da história dos protagonismos dos negros em Ouro Preto.
A exposição Brasil Decolonial reforça o quanto é necessário revisitar a nossa exposição no intuito de trazer novas narrativas mais representativas e reflexivas. Pensamos nas releituras de itens do nosso acervo que tinham pouca visibilidade na proposta original e agora elas são colocadas como protagonistas. Ela traz justamente uma outra visão da história, a visão que muitas pessoas não têm, muitos visitantes não têm a visão, eles têm a visão do colonizador. E trazer a Cambinda, mostrando a história que ela tem por trás, mostrar que os indígenas ainda estão vivos, que é uma coisa que infelizmente na exposição isso fica meio perdido, é maravilhoso.
O vídeo Histórias de Vida, produzido no âmbito do Projeto Ecos, também faz parte da exposição. Ele registra trajetórias de resistência e de afirmação da presença africana nas cidades do Rio de Janeiro e Lisboa, entrelaçadas pelo legado colonial. Buscamos, com essa exposição, ocupar o museu, comprometer esse lugar de poder com uma atitude decolonial que desvenda histórias silenciadas, foca nas individualidades e nos sujeitos invisibilizados. Ao ampliar essa escuta, fazemos uma ponte importante com o tempo presente e trazemos à luz alguns dos dispositivos coloniais acionados em discursos e ações racistas na sociedade brasileira contemporânea.
We brought the main actresses here, and I will pass the word to Dr. Marcia Chuva. And I will be passing the presentation.
Good evening, good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here with you. I'd like to thank Keila for inviting us to visit the University of Pittsburgh and for promoting this meeting, this great meeting with Jennifer Johnson. Thank you. And our colleagues from Unirio. I'm going to read my text to not lose my time. This presentation aims to put the debate on whiteness and racism in the field of heritage and museums. For this roundtable, I want to reflect on the wideness of museological contexts, reflect specifically on the wide invisibility in the museums, which appears intertwined with the way white people see themselves, perceiving themselves as universal. I work with the idea that whiteness is a naturalized perspective through which whites do not see themselves as race, but as universal beings and a benchmark of humanity. In Brazil, since the early 20th century, a question has been asked: is there racism in Brazil? And the response that became dominant was based on the thesis of racial democracy developed in Brazil, relying on an intense miscegenation that would have characterized the former Brazilian slave society, with the protagonism of the white man. The Brazilian nation, therefore, was and is imagined as a country without racism, despite endless evidence of structural racism present in the daily lives of Black or brown people. So I'll observe below the National Historical Museum, not this, in Rio de Janeiro, as the one that you saw, the video, as a privileged space for the presentation of the hegemonic narrative about the imagination of the nation, in which structural racism and the invisibility of whiteness prevail. As shown in the video, the exhibits, The Colonial Brazil, Other Histories, produced the interventions on the main exhibit circuits. I chose the second chair to talk with you today. The second chair is a means of urban transport supported by two men to carry sitting person. In modernity, the second chair was used in Europe in the 17th to 19th centuries and spread in all regions where relations of exploitation and oppression of one social and racial group over another were imposed as a rule. Therefore, the second chair was adopted in various regions, in several regions of European colonialism in the America, Africa, and Asia. You can pass next. Yes, just to show some kinds of second chair, another one, in Angola in the beginning of the 20th century, in Brazil, it was used as the most common means of locomotion in the cities of Rio de Janeiro and Salvador, two great cities in the 18th and 19th centuries. It was carried by enslaved Africans. Those are figures painted in the 19th century, enslaved Africans. With rich ornaments, the second chair displayed the refinement and richness of its owners. This object demonstrated social aspects of the slavery period, such as the ostentation of the possession of slaves especially dedicated to this service, who walked with ornate trousers and even a hat, but with bare feet, as can be seen in various images of the time. I think the next one. Yeah. Objects like this are present in many museums, not only in Brazil. They have been and are still exhibited as a curiosity of remote times, evoking the glamour of these means of transport seen by common sense as so expedient, and most of the time making the ones who carry it invisible, as well as the system that encompasses them. The second chair in the National Historical Museum used to be exhibited in the same way. The information in the caption addressed aspects in the National Historical Museum, aspects related to the type of people in society who could use it, but did not bring information about the carriers. By making invisible the presence of enslaved Black people and the hard work of carrying other people in the urban scene, the place of those who occupy the chair is naturalized. This universal place of those who are carried makes whiteness invisible. So our intervention in the exhibit, Brazil, the colonial Brazil, sought to make the seventh chair a sensitive object. That is, an object that triggers sensitive memories and requires some kind of historical reparation. Next one. This is how it was exhibited before. Oh, yes, this is before, and the next one is our caption. In the new caption, we emphasize that it was carried by enslaved men who performed with the strength of their bodies an inhuman act of transporting people through the city. A very small caption, but to say what we want. At the same time, we took advantage of the glass wall behind the chair to reproduce in large size several newspaper advertisements that emphasize their physical characteristics, in order to highlight the intense trade of human beings treated as merchandise and property of another human being. The next one, please. Yes, the advertisements and the next. They were described as chair carriers in the advertisements of purchase and sale of enslaved people published in the newspapers from Bahia and Rio de Janeiro during the 19th century. The ads contained information about their origins, location from where they come from in Africa, and about their physical form and appearance because of the job. This activity represented the most explicit occupational symbol of Black subordination in the city of Rio and Salvador. Therefore, in Brazil, the seventh chair became a symbol of the material culture produced by slavery. In addition to this information, we placed in the exhibition space a cartoon that had been published in the Brazilian press in 2020. With the aim of demonstrating the update of the whiteness pact in Brazil society and how it remains strategically invisible. This is the cartoon. The cartoon represents current politicians discussing the question that has been reproduced for decades in Brazil society, as already mentioned above. Is there racism in Brazil? In the cartoon, they say, no, there is no racism in Brazil. At the same time, they are being carried in saddle chairs by barefoot, ragged Black men who undergo all kinds of works to survive and sustain their families. In this sense, politicians conclude that there is no racism in Brazil. The author of the cartoon, Leandro Assis, demonstrates the hypocrisy of the acts. By taking this object from a remote time in which it's commonly placed in exhibitions in different museums and bringing it to the present time, we confront narratives and transport it into sensitive objects, into a sensitive object which demanded reparation. I am much surprised that this object is presented with glamour simply as a means of transport for rich and noble people. I am sure that many of you have seen a similar object in some museum. There are many of them in different museums in Brazil. Exposure to the public is a privileged place of communication, in which exposed objects star in narratives built behind the scenes, presented on stage to the observers and producing effects on their audience. That's why I believe we must pay attention to the power of those places like museums, especially national museums. Thank you.
Aline,
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you to talk about the writing of history in Brazilian museums. I would like to thank Keila Grinberg and the Center of Latin American Studies for this opportunity. It's so good to be here with Marcia Chuva, Leila, and Jennifer John. The title of my presentation is Brazilian Museums and Whiteness. I studied on the National Historical Museum. And if I may, I would like to read because of the time. Next slide, please. The National Historical Museum, from now on called MA10, a federal institution linked to the Brazilian Institute of Museums under the Ministry of Culture, is considered one of the largest and oldest history museums in Brazil. Created in 1922 to celebrate the centennial of Brazil's independence, it honored the Brazilian monarchy, the armed forces, the white and male aristocracy, and the Catholic Church, which correspond to a large part of its collection. The MA10 occupies, sorry, I skipped this. In 2022, the MA10 carried out a series of activities to celebrate its centenary. Among them, the exhibition, The Colonial Brazil, Other History, the same as Marcia Chuva told us, with provocations and proposals for different viewpoints on topics and objects related to the history of the African diaspora in Brazil. The 10 objects collection that underwent interventions were acquired during the administration of the institution's first director, Gustavo Barroso. We will highlight here the collection of torture instruments by contrasting its references and presence in the MA10's exhibits from 1922 to 1959, as well as its current presentation. This is the National Historical Museum in the past and present. In the first permanent exhibition of MA10, published in a 1924 catalog, the room Abolition and Exile was the only one that referred to Africans and Afro-Brazilians. This mention was restricted to slavery and its extinction understood as an action of the state in 1888. And the reason for the deposition of the monarchy from power, resulting in its exile in 1889, with the proclamation of the Republic. Freedom was seen as a concession and not an achievement, reiterating the passive place of Black people. In 1930, Gustavo Barroso presents the room Antônio Prado Jr. in a report for Selecta magazine, entitled Slavery Memories. The room's name honored two people at the same time, the then mayor of the city of Rio de Janeiro and his father, Antônio da Silva Prado, senator of the empire at the time of the abolition. In this report, Barroso was aware that slavery was a fact that could not be forgotten. However, his effort is for it to be seen as something that was overcome. leaving no marks in society. By blaming the circumstance and not those responsible for slavery, Barroso promotes a distancing between the heroes worshipped at the museum and the slavery system. He defends an idea of unity in the post-abolition period, strengthening what became known, according to Kabengele Munanga, as the myth of racial democracy, or the absence of racism. Barroso's stance can be understood according to what Cida Bento called the pact of whiteness, a narcissistic pact that, while remembering slavery and the evils it caused, forgets those responsible for the system and those who benefit from it. Barroso informs the object displayed in the room, highlighting the instruments of torture by their names, recalling the farms and feudal lords of the sugar and coffee cycle in the development of our economic existence. Thus, Barroso finds meaning for slavery as the reason for the economic development of sugarcane and coffee plantations. However, by 1955, this space was no longer used for exhibits, and the object preserves there were distributed to other rooms. The instrument of torture were concentrated in the Conde de Bobadilla room, a viceroy who worked to stop runaway slaves and the formation of their independent communities, quilombos, in the territory of Rio de Janeiro. Were the torture instrument seen as a focus? The instruments of torture are among the best documented and classified objects at the National Historical Museum, as well as the most widely published beyond the exhibits, even to these days. It actually was the only collection related to the slave trade past that grew over the years until 2004. The exhibition Construction of the Imperial State, inaugurated in 2010, and already had a concern to create tension on the slavery period narrative. The instruments of torture were placed on a red wall to remember the blood of the violence against the enslaved, and to contrast them to the porcelain tableware engraved with the coffee barons' coats of arms. The idea was to de-romanticize a memory of 19th century nobility and opulence, denouncing the slavery that sustained it. However, this romantic view prevailed. After all, slavery had already ended, and those instruments were no longer used. This section integrates the exhibition The Colonial Brazil, Other Histories, with 3 interventions. 1, the insertion of an excerpt from the petition of the enslaved woman Esperança Garcia, who in 1770 denounced the ministry treatment she suffered from her master and demanded a transfer to a farm where she could stay with her family. 2, new description for each instrument of torture, reminding us that some, such as handcuffs and chains, are still used today against Black people in Brazil. 3, a video featuring headlines from newspapers and magazines reporting crimes against the Black population, including the murder of Marielle Franco in 2018. The headlines are project with the song Voz Bandeira, Flag Voice, written and confirmed by Marina Illich. Next, in conclusion, according to Luis Rufino, the path we followed helps us think about how much we can take advantage of a pedagogy of the crossroads to question a history written by whiteness and decolonize museums. Perhaps we can adopt a more issue-based perspective as well reference the Orisha named Eshu, a date in the African Brazilian religions. We appropriate the instrument of torture, which are objects of whiteness acquired by it to violate the enslaved, and compose collections in museums. However, these items are treated as if they belonged to the enslaved, as if these people themselves used them against their voice. In order to remember silent voices of resistance, such as Esperança Garcia, we show how much this past is present when we update the description, highlighting the contemporary uses of these objects and project in newspapers headlines that feature the structural racism that insists on violating, killing, and leaving the Black Brazilian people to die. Following the example of the Lords of Movement, we swallow what exists to vomit it out, transform it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aline. I'll pass to Leila.
Good afternoon. I'm also very happy to be here with you, and I'd like to thank Keila, Jennifer, and Aline for organizing this event, and all of these marvelous people at CLAS for making me so welcome here. So thanks a lot. For many years, I have been researching cultural heritage preservation policies and tourism practice in historic cities in Brazil and other South American countries. The proposal I brought to this meeting was largely motivated by the previous meeting in which we attended the presentation of Professor Ibrahima Sachs on the memory of slavery at Whitney Farm. To this end, I begin by talking about one of the interventions in our exhibition, Brazil the Colonial. So, this is a statue of Emperor Dom Pedro II, who ruled Brazil between the years 1840 and 1889, a period also marked by the intense slave trade and the political and economic power of the slave-owning coffee elites. The second and last emperor of Brazil is one of the main characters represented in National Historic Museum and in the public space of many Brazilian cities. In the many representations of the past that occur in soap operas, series, and many other historical reconstructions, this character is usually represented as a cultural man in love with the country he governed. It hardly appears directly associated with slavery, but rather with a time, the empire, when Brazil was more respected, more honest, more powerful, which Ricardo Salles defined with an imperial nostalgia that was built and reaffirmed over time. Okay, now we can. I'll show this other statues of Dom Pedro II in the museum. And this was a very popular soap opera showed in 2021 about the Brazilian Empire. there are no subtitles, but after I can make a summary. It's very fast.
Diário de Dom Pedro II, Brasil, 1856.
O país respira novos ares, após a independência proclamada por meu pai, Dom Pedro I. Eu amo essa terra e jurei defendê-la de quem quer que seja.
Quem são vocês?
Soldados del ejército paraguaio. A mi comando, General Solano López.
Retire-se de meu país.
Un día, todo el Brasil se va a curvar ante Solano López.
Os estúdios Globo têm muito orgulho em anunciar que mais uma novela inédita vai começar. Gravada com todos os protocolos de segurança para a saúde das equipes. Em agosto, estreia a nova novela das 6.
Estamos nos tempos do imperador.
Yeah, it's a summary of what's said. It was a successful soap opera because it was during pending time, so people really watched it. Our new intervention proposes thought to construct new narratives by showing that Dom Pedro II lived with slavery throughout his reign, and that the royal family owned many domestic slaves who worked in their home. So, the next you can see better. That was the label in the state of Dom Pedro II. The same nostalgic feeling can be perceived in North coffee plantations in the Paraíba River Valley. This region, relatively close to the city of Rio de Janeiro, was the largest coffee producer in the world and had a large concentration of enslaved people during the 19th century. Perhaps you can show them. Tourism has grown in this region, including old farms in recent decades. Many of the old manor houses have become hotels or started to open their doors to visits by tourists, attracted primarily by the luxury and architecture that feature European furniture and gardens. They are not seen as places of trauma, marked by the most varied forms of violence. Some, similar to what happens in old plantations in the southern United States, celebrate weddings and have become hosts to cultural events such as music and culinary festivals. Some of the old enslaved quarters, after undergoing renovations, are even used as guest rooms, which some of our students were able to see and participate in a visit organized by Keila Grinberg some time ago. Next two slides. One of these plantations, the Santa Eufrásia plantation, had an event that attracted many visitors, which was a soirée or afternoon tea with the owner dressed as a 19th century baroness. At this event, there were also Black women dressed as mucamas or domestic enslaved who served food and drinks to tourists who enjoyed afternoon tea and curious stories about the plantation's past. This is Santa Eufrásia plantation. This is the owner dressed as a baroness. And this is the afternoon tea. Yeah, I don't think so. This situation would actually change when on December 6th, 2016, a report in the Intersected newspaper denounced these cracks and went viral on the internet in the following year. The federal public minister convened a hearing with representatives of the region's social and Black movements, especially Quilombo São José, a community of descendants of enslaved people who live in the region and fought for the right to remain on the land. The lineage of Quilombo São José, family of Quilombo São José, and a celebration of Quilombo São José, it's Jongo, they are dancing Jongo. With the support of university professors who are researchers on the topic of slavery and Afro-Brazilians, it was established that a legal adjustment term of conduct should be produced and applied to the Santa Eufrásia file. The hearing determined that punitive measures would not be applied, but rather pedagogical measures both for the activities carried out by this plantation and by the other families of the region. So the owner was given tasks such as studying 2 signs. One to tell the story in Vale do Paraíba, showing that it's not just a region of Barons, but also of Africans and descendants of Africans, and another plaque with the names of all the enslaved people of Santa Eufrásia plantation. Make a public apology via video and note to the Black community. The immediate termination of any performance or use of clothing that characterize people as newcomers, wherever they are, white or Black. The exchange of the word slave for enslaved person in oral and written narrative. A 60-day training of all plantation employees, and the transmission of knowledge acquired for visitors, and the presence of materials produced by Black movements. So this is the folder that was produced, and now it's in the interest of the plantation. And with the names of all the enslaved people who worked in this plantation, and that was possible because of the researchers of this region specialized in slavery, so they know this will. And okay, the memories surrounding the valorization of aristocratic dynamics naturalize the crime against humanity community within their properties during the slavery period. The installation of plaques and other forms of information capable of marking such spaces as place of memory of slave and the trajectory of enslaved people in Brazil, contrary to what one might think when one imagines that tourists just want to have fun on their visits, was not the thing. Since informative material, as well as well-trained professionals, can even serve as a form of distinction for tourist activities and add value to plantations that have quality information. It was even possible to identify the increasing demand for research such as inventories of enslaved and other plantations in the region, who would like to make plaques like the one found at Santa Eufrásia plantation. The marks of slavery and African heritage were systematically erased in Brazil. For authors such as Pernille, the delay in recognizing the memory of trafficking in Latin American countries would be linked to the emphasis given to the idea of miscegenation and racial democracy in the process of construction of national identities in these countries. This case is not isolated, and we can reflect on the difficulties of building places of traumatic memories in the country. And in this sense, we cannot fail to mention the large number of monuments and museums that make reference to the military dictatorship that started in 1964. The images constructed are part of the construction of a national identity marked by exclusion, but equally marked by the underground struggles and memories of social groups that in moments of favorable political, economic, and cultural circumstances can materialize their stories. We can associate the invisibilities of Afro-Brazilian memory with a frequent attempt to assert a national identity capable of redefining and updating the myth of three races, a country marked by joy and natural beauty without showing social basis. As is clear from the maps capable of showing social and racial federation in this country, racism denial of the slave past and consequently the refusal and attacks on affirmative policies remain strong. In the two cases quickly presented, the importance of historical research was clear, as well as the dissemination of results obtained beyond the walls of universities, such as museums and old venues that host tourist activities, practices that have more recently been classified as public history. Although we can follow an effort in search of building memories about the slave past in this case mentioned, there is still a lot to be done to materialize such narratives. In this space, we only seek to highlight some of the tensions, disputes, and ambiguities present, and in the same way, there is still a lot to be researched and analyzed about this process.
Thank you, Marcia, Aline, and Leila, and especially thank you for keeping up with the time. I've been terrorizing them. And with that, I will pass to Jennifer.
So I'm deeply honored to be in this position to be able to serve as a discussion leader after these three wonderful presentations. I think we're all so grateful to the three of you, Marcia, Aline, Leila, for coming to Pittsburgh and for preparing these wonderful presentations and delivering them to us in a language that is not one that you so often delivering presentations in. This is a tremendous effort, and we had here three model presentations for the work of what in the History of Art and Architecture department we talk about in terms of museum studies, and in terms particularly of what we've been discussing in the History of Art and Architecture department in terms of reparation, reparative efforts in museums, particularly symbolic reparations. So we saw with Marcia the example of the sedan chair, the intervention in how the sedan chair is presented. With Aline, your focus, particularly in the conclusion on those instruments of torture and the limitation of perspective that was provided in the museum to those instruments of torture continuing. And then Leila, this example of the symbolic reparations occurring on this privately owned farm, a privately owned tourist attraction in terms of linguistic changes, right, that were so crucial, signage and education. So providing us with these models for this work of intervening in public space. And I really appreciated, Marcia, your conclusion that having the opportunity to exhibit things where a large number of people will see them is a particularly privileged form of communication, right? Your emphasis on this public history, on public communication, on the relatively intangible. So before we open it up, we have a wonderful audience here, students and professors from many different departments, many different programs, and I'm sure there are wonderful questions. I thought it might be helpful to offer a bit of the context that graduate students in the History of Art and Architecture department and I were able to learn on Tuesday from you when you visited our seminar about the long history of this work that you're doing, the extended history of this work that, and I don't, Keila, do you want to speak to this or do you want me to summarize it? We'll see. Will you please correct me?
Sure.
I depend on you to correct me, Keila. So my understanding, and the students can also correct, my understanding is that you've all been working together for a long time at Unirio, specifically at the university, and that in particular, Keila and Leila and then Aline all worked as teachers, as pre-university level teachers for several years in the course of getting your PhDs in history. That this is a common thing, and that this Museo Nacional de Historia, this National History Museum, is, I mean, has anyone here been to this in the audience? Have you visited this museum? Yeah. A few people. It's not on my itinerary as an art historian in Rio twice. It did not figure right on the list. I'm sorry to say, I haven't been there yet. I look forward to going. What I learned from you is that, and this is separate from the National Museum, which became known around the world because of the tragic and horrible fire of 6 years ago. This is another museum on the bay, right, or in downtown Rio near the port, and one that is free and that is very regularly visited by school groups. Right, my sense from you was that it's these school children. And then your university classes eventually who made up the major viewership of this museum, and that you, Aline, worked in the museum before getting your PhD, during, and certainly after, right? During and after. And so you were and you earned your PhD at Unirio working with, no, separately, please.
No, I worked at I had worked at National Historical Museum for over 2 years, but since 2018 we have been working together because this specific project called Echoes.
Ela quer saber onde você fez o programa.
I took my doctorate at Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, another university in Rio de Janeiro too, but another.
So multiple universities. Then historians across universities coming together, doing this work with the EU. I think people might like to hear more about the Echoes project.
I can say a couple of words about that. So the decolonial Brazil exhibit started as our task in a project funded by EU, which is called Echoes. European colonial heritage modalities in cities. So this was a project funded by you with precisely the goal of discussing cultural heritage and in their minds decolonize, in some ways decolonize European thoughts or practices. In their minds,
so one of the things that you are doing, besides visiting classes and giving these talks and going to Washington, D.C. to visit museums on this trip, is you're working on a catalog, right? You're working on a book, a publication to document your intervention into the National History Museum, because without such a document, this intervention could be lost.
Yes, it will be disappeared.
Right? And this is a very, I think this is a really important discussion that that we're having at the university museum nexus about this question of symbolic reparations, of interventions, and their relationship to documentation, to writing, right, versus to video and this work. But it's so I was so inspired to learn about how your scholarship, the scholarship that you presented today, has its roots in visits with school age students to this museum year after year, talking about these. It seems to me that what you managed to do in the museum was to concretize on the walls for the broader public the discussions that you and the students and your many peers and colleagues in Rio were having for years, that wasn't accessible necessarily outside of these educational contexts. So yes, I'd like to open it up to our public.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. It was really nice. I have two questions for Marcia Chuva. The first two, in your presentation, you talked about Gustavo Barroso, and this surprised me a lot because if I understood correctly, he was also part of the integralist part, which is a fascist part, literally a Mussolini-inspired part in Brazil. And he was in charge of this exhibit about slavery. So my question for you is how his integralist ideology shaped the exhibit? That would be my first question. And in the end of your presentation, you alluded to this very interesting thing that is to be a issue-based perspective. So I'd like to hear more from you what this is about, because it sounds very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, Gustavo Barroso was integralist, and his ideas about the nation, the slavery, is shaped by this ideology. He saw, ele via o Brasil como uma unidade e ele não enxergava preconceito racial, não enxergava ou fazia questão de não enxergar.
So his thoughts about slavery were part of these ideas about the country, and he wouldn't see that connected with racial prejudice or racism as a sign of the past.
Yes. And his idea of the national identity is difficult. É difícil. Deixa eu pensar. A proposta de identidade nacional do Gustavo Barroso era uma proposta branca, masculina e bastante excludente.
So his ideas about national identity were white, masculine, and very excluded.
E a escravidão e as pessoas negras eram vistas como, quer dizer, a escravidão como algo do passado.
Slavery was seen as something from the past.
E os negros como se não existissem mais.
And black people as if they didn't exist anymore.
E em relação à epistemologia de Exu,
in relationship to the epistemology of Exu,
eu me inspiro nas reflexões da Cidinha da Silva, do Luiz Rufino, que falam de uma epistemologia, de uma pedagogia da encruzilhada. E
so it's really difficult to translate. So she's inspired by the work of other people who think of this epistemology as the knowledge that it's kind of crossroads knowledge.
Yes.
That was
Sacred crossroads.
sacred crossroads knowledge.
From a knowledge from African Brazilian religions, a way to view and to deal with the present and the past, inspired an issue as a way to resistance, a way to create other ways to live and to re-exist. I don't know if I can answer.
I think Pernille and Laura.
Thank you all so much for the wonderful talk and for bringing your work to us. You know, it's really wonderful to hear, because there's so much I feel that resonates with what's going on in the United States today. These efforts to try to write a more all-encompassing national narrative, right, that really reflects everybody's history in the nation. But here in the US, it's also become very much a political issue, right? And one of the things that those who resist this effort to rewrite the national narrative latch onto is the impact that this kind of exposure to a traumatic period in history can have on children. And I was really struck by, you use exactly the same word, but in a positive way, that is used here in a negative way. And when you were saying to generate discomfort, right? Because this is precisely what they will say here. We don't want children in the classroom to feel discomfort or feel upset about the past, right? So we should not tell them about this past, or it should be a sanitized version. But it sounds to me you are going all in on this. So I'm curious to hear, both as teachers, as people who've sort of been a part of this, what's your feelings about the importance of this kind of discomfort, but also how has the reception been from children who's been exposed to this?
Thanks. Maybe you can hear Laura's question and put together. Thanks for leaving. Laura?
Thank you. And you know, the comment on discomfort of children is actually about certain state legislatures. My question is, because I'm a colleague of Keila's, I went to the History Museum in Lisbon looking for any recognition of slavery in Portugal, or recognition of the relationship. And I was amazed at the efforts that they went to really erase that process. And I was wondering if the way that they did it was to talk about kind of the importation of resources, right? So coffee and sugar, and they connected that to the rebuilding of Lisbon. And I was wondering if you saw, I know that you're focusing on the ceramics, the elite materials, but is there also a kind of narrative around production and resources and buildings that is a part of your discussion of how history is remembered? And do you have plans eventually to take it to Portugal?
Vou falar em português, Keila me ajuda. Entendo que nós tivemos a intenção de provocar desconforto, de fato, na exposição, mas ao mesmo tempo pensamos, existe um setor educativo no museu que recebe as escolas e faz a visita guiada no circuito.
So we really had the intention to provoke discomfort with the exhibit, but there is also an educative sector of the museum that has the task to intermediate visits, especially from schools.
Eu, talvez, respondendo as duas, o que eu entendi, enfim, Eu entendo que o acervo do museu ele é de objetos de tortura, ele é de riqueza, do desenvolvimento de uma ideia de desenvolvimento e de riqueza do país, mas o nosso papel é justamente falar desses objetos de outras formas.
So, trying to connect both questions, if you look at the objects that are displayed in the museums, they are objects that reinforces this vision of development, of wealth that was created in the 19th century. We're just trying to narrate them in a different way.
Yeah.
And if I can add a little thing, the education department at specifically this museum is doing wonderful work of especially getting this transformative this conflict into an educated.
To conclude, I like to say that os objetos não definem nossa narrativa, né? Tudo que construímos.
So, she highlighted the objects, they don't define the narrative. That we are defining our narratives and then including the objects.
Complementando, obrigada pelas perguntas. Complementando o que a Márcia falou, o departamento educativo tem específicos programas para cada faixa etária, para cada grupo, tipo de interesse.
So the education department has different programs for each grade at each ages, and they adapt the content depending on who is going there.
Yes. And I don't know.
Se a exposição para Lisboa.
Se formos convidados, sim.
So you're asking if we're invited to go to Lisbon. Bring the exhibit there.
Eu queria fazer um comentário.
Yes.
Queria fazer um comentário sobre a fala, porque acho que uma coisa que nós observamos nos nossos trabalhos, no trabalho dos nossos orientandos,
yeah, one of the things that she wants to highlight is something that we observe while working with our students.
É que normalmente o lugar do trabalho ele nunca aparece nas exposições, nas políticas de memória.
So it's when in those politics of memory or in the exhibits, they never emphasize labor.
Então, por exemplo, nós trabalhamos com as políticas de preservação do patrimônio. As cidades históricas, elas são o resultado do trabalho, quer dizer, as igrejas foram construídas com o resultado do trabalho escravizado, as construções maravilhosas estão lá como resultado, mas muitas vezes as minas, por exemplo, onde eles trabalhavam, elas não fazem parte desse circuito. Nas fazendas, a mesma questão.
So what they're saying is that very rarely they show those places as result of labor of enslaved individuals. So if you look at the so-called historic cities, the 18th century mining towns, they are never portrayed as the result of the work of people. And if you look at the plantations, it's the same. It's always result of wealth, but not result of labor.
So, just wondering, this happened during a time in politics in Brazil where different from, well, or maybe the same still, but still contested, right? It's not in so many ways very different from how we live in the US. And so I'm wondering in terms of pushback or efforts to dilute or to devalue the work that's been done.
A gente teve problema com
sim. Como acho que muitos sabem, né? Nós tivemos um governo, não sei como definir, mas talvez de extrema direita recentemente, e a exposição foi produzida nesse período.
So, as probably all of you know, there was a far-right government in Brazil in the past years, and this exhibit was produced precisely then.
Isso fez com que tivéssemos algumas censuras, alguns atrasos. tudo isso influenciou.
So we suffered delays, censorship, all kinds of, I mean, they tried because at the end we were able to do it. But all kinds of problems from small to big that would bring us to do the exhibit.
E a recepção mostra isso, né? Nós temos comentários positivos, mas ataques também, pessoas que não gostaram do que viram, que escreveram para o museu contra o que foi feito.
So we also the reception of the exhibit also showed this as we received a lot of messages praising the exhibit, but also attacks showing that we're destroying the exhibit, maybe we're destroying history too, and all kinds of things. Shows the political division in the country as well.
I think I want to follow up on that question. There was an example of the soap opera, and I was wondering, since museum is this one place where you negotiate the national identity and how whiteness isn't visible or visible. But if I think I want to know about the link between the museum as a place of this negotiation and the soap opera. So how much the museum or what is happening in the museum is transported outside of it.
Me parece que nas produções audiovisuais, especialmente na TV aberta, é muito mais difícil trazer determinadas discussões.
So it seems that especially in the audiovisual productions, like the properties, especially in the open channels, not cable, it's much more complicated to bring this critical view.
Mas eu acho que cada vez mais nós temos essa tentativa, né, por parte dos especialistas de também produzirem conteúdos, produzirem vídeos. O problema é que nós nunca temos a mesma repercussão que a TV tem.
Is that more and more you see scholars and activists trying to produce more content. The problem is that we don't go viral as much as the TV shows, which are still really, really highly influenced by this idea of nostalgia from the CLAS. So I think there was
Hello everyone, thank you so much for this presentation, and it's great to see this discussion happening here in the space. And my question would be, since we were talking about discomfort earlier, my question is about discomfort too, but a different kind of discomfort to see, if you think about the museum practices or historiography, or if you think about academic spaces in Brazil and also here, Beatriz Nascimento, a Black intellectual from Brazil, she has this quote that the Brazilian history has been told by the white Brazilians. And this museum, this exhibition is talking about decolonizing Brazil. But my question is about funding practices, who directs museum, who is behind these actions, because many times you see all the work that has been done by the Black Brazilian population, even in terms of museums. If you think about Muquifu, the Museum of Urban Quilombos and Favelas, the important work that the Black Brazilian population has been doing in terms of not just decolonizing, but what the Quilombolas thinkers have been talking about, contra colonização, not just decolonial, but contra decolonial. If you think about Antonio Bispo, there's a Quilombola intellectual, and his concept of against colonization, not decolonization. So my question is for us to think about, in the presentation, it was mentioned that freedom was perceived as a concession in Brazilian history. Like in 1888, the princess just signed this document and gave it to you, now you're free. How can we think about decolonizing practices or contra-colonização, that it's not perceived as a concession as well, but highlighting and emphasizing the work that the Black population in Brazil has already been doing, but do not have the funding to organize an exhibition like that, to be on television. Like when you see Dom Pedro, that name stays in our mind. But then in one of the slides that they had the name of the enslaved people, there were so many names, and then it's like orange that are impossible to read how those names have been erased, because even when they are up here, they put together like this is one block that we cannot even remember, who they are. So my question is,
I think we are very lucky to have a former director of the museum on the table, and maybe she can address this.
I was a director of the National Historical Museum between February and July last year. And it was so important because the museum was became 100 years, and it was the first time that it was directed by a woman, a Black woman, and who starts started it to work in that museum. And this, it's very important what you said, because this is a process that we need to continue, inspired in this experience, in this idea, and by Beatriz Nascimento, Lélia Gonzalez, Nilo Bento, Silva Bento, and this exhibition for us, it was a significant step to change the narrative of the museum, but more important than change the narrative is change the practice, and create exhibitions and build the collections with the community, with Black people group, from quilombos, from favelas, and we started some partnerships with other museums known as community museums, and we hope this never stop and continue change the idea of Brazilian history to the public.
Okay, so with that wonderful ending, I want to thank you very much, all of you, for being here, for your questions. I want to thank our panelists, also Jennifer, for commenting, and just give an applause to them. Continue with two other sections that will help you, and then we'll be around here if you want to continue this conversation for a little bit. Thank you. Thank you.